Have you ever stood alone in the English mist, so thick, so silent that you begin to wonder whether the trees still remember your name? That feeling of being watched by something older than the land itself is not just superstition. It's memory. And memory in this country is never quiet. They say England is a place of history, but that's only part of the truth. History is what we write in books. Legends are what seep into the soil, cling to the hills, and whisper from standing stones. And in this land, those legends are still alive. Our story begins not with kings or dragons, but with a nameless man. A knight, perhaps. A wanderer. Or simply a soul who had lost his place in the world. He came to the northern moors where the fog hangs low, and time seems to forget itself. Locals feared the place, calling it the Hollow of Echoes. They claimed no bird sang there and that cattle refused to pass the stones that stood like crooked teeth along its edge. He came seeking silence, but what he found was a voice. It began with the wind, the kind that doesn't move trees, but wraps around your neck like a memory. Then came the hum, low rhythmic, as if the earth itself were chanting. And finally, he saw it, a stone, alone in the center of the hollow, half buried in moss, but glowing faintly as though the sun still loved it. He knelt, not from awe but instinct. Something in him recognized the shape of the stone. Its angles spoke of forgotten alphabets of truths carved before time was measured. His fingers brushed the surface. Visions surged through his mind. A boy pulling a sword from a stone. A queen with fire in her hair riding a chariot over Roman banners. A hound with eyes like stars guarding the door of an ancient church. These were not stories. These were memories. And they did not belong to him. Or perhaps they always had. You see, England does not choose its storytellers lightly. Sometimes it waits for a heart broken enough to hear. And this man, whoever he was, had heard enough of the world's cruelty to be silent, long enough for the land to speak. And speak it did. The voice came not from the air, but from within. It told him of a time before cathedrals when druids walked among the yew trees and whispered to the rivers. It told him of the Sita, the fair folk, not tiny winged creatures, but tall and terrible lords of the other world. It told him of giants who built barrows from bones, and of hounds that howled only when death stood behind you. And it told him softly of Arthur, not the king of courtly poems, but the Arthur who bled in the mud, who saw his friends die screaming in his arms, who buried his own child beneath an oak tree and never wept. The Arthur who was promised and betrayed. The man stayed there through the night, wrapped in fog, hearing stories, not with his ears, but with his blood. When morning came, the stone had cracked. From its center, a single violet flower had bloomed, impossible in winter. He took it, gently pressed it between the pages of a journal he hadn't written in for years. He left the moor that day with nothing but that flower, and a weight he couldn't name. Some say he became a priest. Others claim he vanished entirely, swallowed by the mist. But a traveler who passed through that place years later reported seeing a sword buried in the moor. Not rusted, not broken, clean, sharp, waiting. And so we begin our journey. You may know the names Arthur, Robin, Merlin, but forget what you think you know. These stories have teeth. They are not bedtime fables. They are warnings, prophecies, memories. They are stitched into England's hills and buried beneath its cobblestones. And if you listen closely, if you truly listen, you might hear your own name among them. Because England does not simply tell stories. It invites you to become one. What tale will you choose? There are swords that kill, and there are swords that remember. In the heart of old London, long before it bore that name, there once stood a forgotten cathedral. Cracked marble columns, ivy climbing the stone like veins. And in its center, upon an altar, untouched by time, stood a single sword, buried in an anvil atop the stone. They say it appeared without warning. One winter morning, the frost still biting the stones, it was simply there, gleaming, silent, waiting. No one knew who had placed it there, but carved into its base were words that glowed faintly in the gloom. Whoso pulleth this sword from this stone, and anvil is rightwise king, born of all England. The lords laughed. The barons scoffed. And yet, they tried. One by one, men of renowned knights with golden spurs and chests full of glory stepped forward. Muscles, straining teeth, clenched hearts pounding, and always the sword refused. It did not move. Not for strength. Not for pride. Not even for bloodline. And so the years passed. The cathedral crumbled. Ivy took the walls. Birds nested in its eaves. The sword remained rustless, radiant, untouched. It became myth, until the day a boy wandered in. He was no knight, no lord, just a foster son sent on an errand by his brother a squire's task, nothing more. The great tournament was beginning and the older boy had forgotten his sword. Fetch one, he'd snapped, and make it quick. The boy ran, searching through alleys and stables, until he saw it, the blade in the stone gleaming through the ivy. He didn't pause. He didn't pray. He simply walked forward and grasped the hilt. The stone did not resist. The blade rose like it had been waiting for him, not just for years, but for centuries. The cathedral held its breath. The birds fell silent. Even the ivy seemed to lean closer. And in that moment, the boy Arthur became legend, but not yet king. The nobles did not believe. How could such a child, barely a name, a mere servant, be the heir to a fractured land? They demanded tests. They demanded blood. But destiny cares little for doubt. It answers only truth. And the truth revealed by the wizard who had watched from afar was this. Arthur was not born to a castle but to chaos. His father, Uther Pendragon, a king wrapped in war, and Shadow had made a bargain with magic. For one night's desire, he had traded away certainty. And so when the child was born, he was hidden not out of shame, but survival. Placed in the care of Sir Ector, raised without crown or comfort, Arthur had grown in silence. And perhaps that is why the sword chose him. Because he did not seek it. He did not covet it. He simply answered it. And the blade, oh, the blade sang. They say its name was Wow Caliburn. Before it was Wu. Excalibur, or that it had been forged not by man but by fate, quenched not in water but in starlight. That its edge could split shadow, and that its scabbard could prevent death itself. But in that moment it was not a weapon. It was a voice that called out across a kingdom divided, across villages burned by warlords, across hills where children went hungry and mothers wept alone. It called to a people who had forgotten what unity tasted like, and it said, "Hope still lives." Arthur became king not by force but by faith. The people, the ones who mattered, not the ones in silken halls, saw him, and they believed. Not because he was powerful, but because he had pulled the sword without asking anything in return. And so Camelot rose not from stone, but from belief. A round table where no seat was higher than another. Knights who pledged not to conquer, but to protect. A queen whose eyes held equal fire and sorrow. And at the center, a boy who had become more than a king. He had become a mirror, reflecting the kingdom's longing for honor, for peace, for something more than bloodshed. But even in Camelot, the shadows waited. Not all legends end in triumph, but that is a tale for another part. Tonight, let the memory of the sword remain, still in its stone, still singing not of war but of worth. Because sometimes the truest kings are not the ones born to rule, but the ones who kneel before they rise. The forest remembers, not with words or voices, but with wind and leaf. And in Sherwood the trees still whisper a name, not with fear, but with reverence. Robin Hood, to some a thief, to others a prince. But to the people who lived beneath the weight of tyranny, he was something more. He was justice in green. Our tale begins not with glory, but with grief. England groaned under the burden of taxation. King Richard, noble-hearted and far away, fought his wars in foreign lands. And in his absence, his brother Prince John ruled with an iron fist and a purse grown fat on the backs of peasants. The Sheriff of Nottingham, his tool and terror, bled the countryside dry. Coins were taken from farmers with calloused hands, food from children's mouths. And when cries rose from the mud and dust, they were silenced with the edge of a sword. But in Sherwood Forest, wild, ancient, untamed, a new law was being written. Not by quill and ink, but by arrow and oath. They say Robin Hood had once been a nobleman, the Earl of Huntingdon, cast out by greed and envy. Others say he was born among the trees, raised by the wind, a spirit of rebellion, carved from bark and shadow. Whatever the truth, his legend grew, like ivy wrapping itself around every story of resistance. He struck first not for glory but for vengeance. A family burned from their land. A child whipped for stealing bread. A father broken under false charges. Robin saw them all, and he acted. With bow in hand, his arrows sang through the trees. A tax cart overturned. Gold scattered among the roots. The soldiers, confused, fell to the forest's silence, never knowing where death would come from next. He became myth overnight, but no man stands alone, even one with a cause. Little John was the first to join him, not in surrender, but in battle. They met on a narrow log bridge, neither yielding, staffs clashing with thunderous rhythm. And when the duel ended in laughter, not death, Robin knew he had found his brother. Then came Friar Tuck round, of belly sharp of tongue, strong of spirit. A man of God who believed salvation could come through fists as much as through prayer. Will Scarlet, brash and bold his rage, hot as his hair. Allen a Dale, whose song softened even the forest's edges. One by one, they came not outlaws but outcasts. Not criminals, but champions. Together they became the merry men. But their mirth was armor, their joy a weapon. They robbed from the rich, but only those who feasted while others starved. Bishops in jeweled rings. Merchants who counted coins as children froze. The sheriff of Nottingham raged, sending men into the woods. But Sherwood was alive. It knew its sons. And it hid them well. One of Robin's greatest triumphs came not with violence, but with cleverness. An archery contest, a golden arrow, a trap. The sheriff declared it a public spectacle, certain Robin would come. He did not as a hero, but as a beggar, cloaked and limping. No one noticed as he stepped to the line. His first arrow flew perfect. The next it split. A third impossible. The crowd gasped. The sheriff fumed. Before he could give the order, Robin vanished into green laughter, echoing like birdsong. And yet even legends are not immune to love. Maid Marian, fierce, noble, and proud. A lady of the court who saw through silks and saw the world as it was. She found Robin not in poems but in truth, and she joined him not as ornament, but as equal. Their love was a fire in the heart of the forest. But not all fires burn clean. The sheriff, driven by fury, grew crueler. Villages were burned, allies were captured. A bounty placed so high, it weighed down the very air. And Robin, though swift and clever, began to feel time closing in. One tale says he was betrayed a wound that bled too long. Another that he left quietly, slipping into the trees his purpose fulfilled. A few believe he still walks Sherwood's edge arrow, at his back eyes watching. But the truth lives in every soul who refuses to kneel, in every whisper of justice carried on the wind, in every hand that shares bread, every voice that dares speak when others stay silent. Robin Hood is not gone. He has merely changed faces, and the forest old as memory still knows his name. There are creatures you fight, and then there are those you simply endure because they do not belong to the world of flesh, but to the trembling edges of memory. In the east of England, where the land flattens and the winds howl like grieving spirits, they tell of a hound. Not a mere beast, but a shadow draped in the form of a dog. A presence, a curse, a whisper with claws. They call him Black Shuck. He does not bark, he does not growl, he watches. To glimpse him is to feel your heartbeat slow, not from awe, but from recognition. For Shuck is not a hunter of bodies. He is a herald, and he walks where death is near. The name Shuck may come from the Old English Skucka demon, but this is no tale spun from monks or priests. Black Shuck belongs to the land. He pads along salt-drenched roads across moors, where no trees grow through graveyards, where even the birds refuse to sing. Some say he's as large as a calf, others as big as a horse. But all agree his eyes burn red like the embers of the world's last fire. And sometimes it is said there is only one eye, a single crimson lantern burning through the fog. His first recorded visit came on a Sunday. August 4, 1577. A storm, like no other, rolled over the Suffolk countryside. Thunder shattered the air. Lightning clawed at the skies. Inside Holy Trinity Church in Blithburgh, the faithful huddled in prayer. And then, the doors burst open. What entered was not man. A monstrous black dog, eyes blazing, leapt down the nave. It struck 2 men dead where they knelt, their necks' broken spines twisted as if snapped by a giant's hand. The beast then vanished through the wall, leaving behind scorched stone marks burned so deep they remain to this day. But it was not finished. Miles away at St. Mary's Church in Bungay, a nearly identical scene played out. Screams, a flash of black, another death, another church scarred by claw and flame. The storm passed, but Shuck did not. He remained not always seen but felt. In the silence before a loved one falls ill, in the flicker of a lantern on an empty road, in the sudden stillness of birds before a funeral bell rings. Shuck is not a hunter, he is a reminder that there are boundaries between worlds, and they are thinner than we care to admit. He walks where the veil wears thin, between death and dreaming, between the church and the grave, between the past we bury and the future we fear. Some believe he is the ghost of a warhound still searching for his fallen master. Others say he is one of the wild hunt, that spectral procession that rides across the skies in times of upheaval. A few whisper that he was once a man cursed to walk eternity in the form of his own sins. But ask the old folk in Norfolk or Suffolk and they'll tell you this. When the wind changes, when the mist thickens, when you hear nothing but your own heartbeat, do not run, do not speak, do not look behind you, because if Black Shuck walks beside you, then death yours or another's is not far behind. And should you live through the night, remember, you were not spared, you were warned. Some flames burn for warmth, others burn for vengeance, and in the annals of Britain's ancient past, one woman lit a fire so fierce that Rome, the empire of stone and steel, trembled. Her name was Boudica. She was not born into war. She was a queen of the Iceni, a tribe of the east, a land of wide skies and rich soil. Her husband, King Prasutagus, ruled as a client of Rome, a compromise carved from fear and pragmatism. And for a time, peace held. But peace under empire is a leash, and Rome does not share. When Prasutagus died, he left his kingdom, half to Rome, half to his daughters, hoping law would spare them. Rome saw weakness. They seized everything. And then they broke her. Boudica was dragged into the public square, stripped, lashed. Her daughters, children of royal blood, were taken. Their screams echo still. Honor destroyed, motherhood desecrated, power humiliated, and something ancient awoke in her. Not rage, not hatred, something deeper, something older, a reckoning. She did not go to the courts. She went to the groves. She prayed not to gods of marble, but to the earth beneath her feet, to the spirits in the trees, to the bones buried in barrows older than Rome itself. And the land answered. Tribes gathered, not just the Iceni, but the Trinovantes, the Catovellauni, the broken and the bitter from all corners of Britain. They came painted furious, barefoot and blazing. They came not for conquest, but for cleansing. Boudica stood before them tall, fierce, a mane of red fire. She did not promise glory. She promised justice. They marched first on Camulodunum Colchester, the Roman capital in the east. A city of stone and arrogance, temples to emperors' villas of smug wealth. They burned it to ash. Then came Londinium, London. Rome abandoned it. She did not. The city fell. The rich died screaming. Their gold melted in the fires. Then Verulamium, modern St. Albans, another Roman jewel, turned to smoke. Tens of thousands dead. Not civilians, Rome claimed, but collaborators. No quarter was given, because none had been shown. And in the fires of these cities, Britain almost became free. But Rome remembers how to survive. Governor Suetonius, hardened and ruthless, regrouped his legions, just 10,000 men, against Boudica's horde over 100,000. The odds were madness. But Rome knew one thing Boudica did not: tactics. The battlefield was chosen well, narrow-shielded by forest, a killing funnel. Boudica rode before her army, her daughters at her side. She spoke not of empire or empire's fall. She spoke of mothers, of broken oaths, of chains and fire. The Britons charged, and Rome waited. Javelins flew, shields locked, swords sang, and the wild tide broke. Pressed by their own wagons behind them, unable to retreat, the Britons died in waves, tens of thousands. And Boudica, Queen Mother Fury incarnate, vanished. Some say she drank poison. Others say she fell on her own blade. Some whisper she fled a ghost among forests. But her story did not end, because Rome won the battle. But they lost the illusion. They thought Britain broken, and found it only buried. Boudica became more than a queen. She became a wound in empire, a scar that no statue could hide. And even now, when trains rattle through London's veins and steel towers rise over her bones, she remains. She rides not in chariots now, but in memories, in protests, in rebellions, in every voice that rises against the lash. She was not perfect. She was not kind. She was necessary. Because sometimes the fire that burns everything is the only thing that reminds the world it must be rebuilt. Some spirits are born of legend, others are born of injustice, and some, like the one that rides through Windsor's twilight, are born of both. They call him Herne the Hunter, not a man, not quite a ghost. Something wilder, something older. He rides when the wind howls through the oaks, and the mist crawls low like breath across the earth. They say, if you walk too deep into Windsor Great Park, and you hear a horn when no rider is near, turn back, or follow and be changed. The earliest tales speak of a man, a royal forest keeper in the time of King Richard II, skilled, silent, fiercely loyal. He knew every glade, every hidden trail, every beast's cry. The king trusted him, and that trust made others restless. Jealousy grows quickly in the shadow of power. One hunt changed everything. The king was thrown, his horse panicked by a massive white stag. The animal charged. Death was near. But Herne leapt between them. The stag's antlers pierced deep, a wound that should have killed him. But he survived, healed, some say, by a sorcerer of the woods. Others whisper that it was no healer at all, but a demon-binding spirit to man with antlers sewn into flesh. Herne awoke, changed. He returned to the court, but favor had turned. Whispers spread. His hunts failed. The animals fled him. His hand trembled. His horse refused to ride. The other keepers smiled behind their hands. And one day he vanished. Some say they found him hanging from an ancient oak, a noose around his neck, the antlers still fused to his skull. But death for Herne was only the beginning. The tree where he died blackened. Cattle sickened near it. Travelers lost their way. And sometimes when the moon was high and the storm howled, they saw him. Antlered, pale, riding a black steed through the mist, ghost hounds at his side, chains rattling like old oaths. The wild hunt, not the same as in Norse legend, but perhaps kin to it. A spectral procession of spirits and beasts galloping through the night. An omen of death, a warning of change. Herne became their leader, a cursed guide through the forests of the forgotten. He appears not with wrath but with weight. He watches over Windsor still. And when the land is uneasy, when rulers falter, when war looms, his horn echoes again. Some say he is bound to the fate of the monarchy itself, that when the throne is threatened, he rides. There are those who claim to have seen him in the Blitz, galloping through smoke, his hounds baying over the ruins. Others whisper that he has stood invisible beneath modern street lamps, watching the ghosts of power dine in glass towers. But Herne is not a tale of terror. He is a tale of warning, of what happens when loyalty is betrayed, of what becomes of men cast out for no crime but envy's whisper. He was not noble. He was not gentle. He was necessary, and still is. So if you walk beneath the old oaks of Windsor and feel the wind press too sharply against your back, and hear a horn faint and distant, know this: the forest remembers, and so does he. They say gods create, but so do prisoners. So do the broken. So did Wayland. The world remembers him as a smith, a master of metal, a man whose hands could make swords that sang and rings that shimmered like captured moonlight. But his story is not one of craft alone. It is a tale of betrayal, revenge, and flight. Long before kingdoms rose, before the first cathedral cut into the sky, there lived Wayland, or as some called him, Wallander. He was no ordinary man. Some said he was elf-born child of hidden folk who walked between root and star. Others whispered that his father was a giant, his mother a whisper on the wind. Whatever his origin, none denied his gift. His forge sat nestled in the deep woods, hidden and holy. There, he crafted wonders blades that cut silence, brooches that caught starlight, helmets etched with dreams. But wonders invite envy, and envy invites kings. King Need had heard of Wayland's work, and he wanted it. Not with coin, with conquest. One night, while Wayland slept with ash-streaked hands and soot in his lungs, soldiers came. They bound him. They broke his forge, they stole his treasures, and worse, they severed the tendons behind his knees. No escape, no freedom. He was taken to an island isolated by icy waters. There he was forced to labor to craft weapons for the very man who had stolen his flight. Day after day, Wayland worked. But not just with iron. He worked with silence, with fury, with time. He plotted. The king's sons, curious, foolish, greedy, came to the forge. They wanted to see the man whose hands could bend fate. Wayland smiled. They did not leave. What he made from their bones is spoken only in riddles. A goblet, a brooch, jewels fit for royalty. Gifts he sent back to the palace admired, without question, praised without knowing. And then came the princess. She brought him a broken ring, one that had once belonged to Wayland himself. A stolen treasure, a final insult. He welcomed her, offered her wine, and as the fire flickered, he took back what had been his and more. With each act he rebuilt, not just his vengeance but himself. In secret he forged wings, not made of feathers and wax like Daedalus, but of bone and brass and blackened leather. He strapped them to his crippled frame, climbed the tallest cliff above the sea, and flew. Below, the king raged. Above, Wayland laughed. The world had caged him, but he had reshaped it. He was no longer man, no longer bound. He was myth. The forge where he worked was left cold, his tools silent. But his name, Wayland, echoed through the ages. Some say you can still find his smithy hidden in chalk hills guarded by silence. Others believe he walks among us reborn again and again in every hand that makes art from agony. But one thing is certain. His story is not one of forgiveness. It is one of reclamation. Because sometimes the only way to escape the cage is to melt its bars and fly. They say she rode naked through the streets, but that's not the truth. Not entirely. The truth is more powerful than nudity. It is silence. It is sacrifice. It is a woman named Godiva who dared to strip away power's illusion. In the heart of England, in a town now called Coventry, she lived as a noble woman. Lady Godiva, wife to Leofric, the Earl of Mercia, a warlord hardened by politics and gold. He taxed his people mercilessly. They starved. Their fields dried. Their homes crumbled beneath the weight of silver they did not have. And Godiva, who could have turned her head, did not. She heard the cries, saw the hollow eyes of children too weak to cry, felt the cold in her bones, though her hearth always burned. So she begged, first gently, then sternly, then desperately. Lift the burden, she pleaded with her husband. But Leofric, amused, sneered. Only if you ride through the town naked, he said, thinking to mock her heart. But the powerful often forget that the ones they mock are the ones they should fear. She said nothing, and the next morning, as the town still slept, she disrobed in silence. No attendants, no fanfare, only the sound of her breath and the distant bell tolling matins. She mounted her white horse, hair long as a banner falling like gold around her. She had sent word ahead, shut your windows, close your shutters, let no eyes shame this act. And they obeyed, because this was not spectacle. It was sacrifice. She rode slowly past the square, the well, the chapel, the smithy. No word was spoken. No gaze lifted, except one. A man, they say, a tailor, curiosity unbound. He peeked and was struck blind. Some say he died. Some say he lived haunted. His name became a warning, Peeping Tom. But this is not his story. This is hers. And when she returned cloaked again in dignity, her husband, perhaps stunned, perhaps ashamed, kept his word. The taxes were lifted, and the people remembered. They did not carve her face into coin. They carved her name into legend. For Lady Godiva did what no war could. She broke a lord's pride without sword or siege. She reminded the people that power does not reside in crowns or titles. It resides in acts of courage when no one is watching. She was not shamed. She was sanctified. And now, centuries later, her ride still echoes not in cobblestone or bronze, but in every whisper that says, I will not look away. I will not remain dressed in comfort while others freeze. I will ride, even if the world dares me not to. Every village has its monster. Sometimes it wears fangs. Sometimes it wears robes. This one wore both. They called it the Dragon of Selene. But it was more than scales and fire. It was hunger. It was fear. It was the price of survival paid in blood. The village lay near a lake that once fed the crops, soothed the children's burns, brought swans in spring. But then it came. No one saw its arrival. No thunder, no omen, just silence, then bones. First the livestock, then the fields blackened, then the people one by one until the elders begged for a solution. So they gave it sacrifices. At first animals, then food, then gold. And when those ran out, they gave it their daughters, one every week, clothed in white, tied to the altar at the water's edge. No one defied it, until the princess was chosen, the daughter of the king, and that's when he arrived. George, no one knew him. He wore armor, scratched by old wars, a red cross on his chest faded by rain and blood. His eyes did not shine with pride, but with memory. He asked no permission. He simply walked to the edge of the lake and waited. The sky cracked open, and it came. Not a beast of fantasy. A creature of rot and rage, its wings shredded, its body scarred from battles long forgotten. This was no elegant serpent of storybooks. This was a survivor. It rose from the depths, its mouth, steaming eyes glowing with old curses. The battle was not glorious. It was desperate. George was thrown, burned, his shield shattered, his arm nearly broken. But as the beast roared above him, a single prayer escaped his lips. Not to slay, but to free. He struck, straight through the jaw, deep into the skull, until the shriek became a whisper, and the earth fell silent. The lake ran red. The people emerged cautious, wide-eyed, and when they saw the body, saw the man kneeling beside it, not in triumph, but in exhaustion, they wept. He did not stay. He left before the feast, before the statues, before the church bore his name. Because George knew the dragon was not the true enemy. It was what allowed it to remain. Silence, fear, tradition. He gave them something stronger, a story, and with it a warning. Not all dragons breathe fire. Some whisper from the shadows of churches and councils. Some are slain with swords, others with courage. So now when the bells ring in old villages, when the mist curls around forgotten stones, some say George still walks, still watches. Not for beasts, but for the places they might return to. They say the crown lies buried, that the sword sleeps, that the monsters are myths and the heroes long gone. But they are wrong. England breathes, not in stone and scepter, not in flags or thrones, but in stories, in whispers passed from grandmother to child, in forgotten hills where the mist clings to earth like memory, in the way a raven circles a crumbling tower, in the hush that falls before you step into an old forest. This land is not ancient, it is eternal. Albion, her first name, still lives. Beneath the cathedrals, the motorways, the glass towers, the old roots stretch deep. Through Sherwood's ashes, through Wayland's forge, through the silent stones of Avebury and the green stillness of Glastonbury Tor. This land remembers every oath, every scream, every prayer whispered beside a blade. The stories you've heard, Arthur, Godiva, Herne, George, they were never meant to be final. They are fragments, echoes, reflections of something deeper, something older, a heartbeat, one that pulses in you. Because England's magic is not locked in books or runes. It is reborn each time you ask, what if it's true? Each time you stand beneath a storm and feel something watching. Each time you walk alone and imagine hoofbeats behind you. It's not nostalgia, it's recognition. You are part of the tale now. A witness, a bearer, perhaps even a spark. The crown does not need a head. The sword does not need a war, but the legend, it needs a voice. Yours. So tell it. In poems, in protest, in silence, in kindness when the world roars, in courage when the crown seems lost. The monsters still stir, the heroes still ride, and the land, she waits. Her name is Albion, her breath is fog, her eyes are watching, and her story timeless.